Yeah, good day everyone. This is Abbey. I'm still trying to set up, and it appears the network is a bit bad this evening. So, you know the book we've been reading. The book is A Journey in Service. That is Ibrahim Babangida's book. And we've read part 1. We are now going to part 2. Please I'd like to invite others to join us. As you know, this is a special book. It's actually not part of the selected books, but since it's fitting into the line of thought, that is a historical book, even though it is a moment. And I'm glad that you have decided to join us in this reading. So, without much waste of time, we will just proceed right away into the reading. So, we are done with the part 1 of A Journey in Service. You remember, we were able to read who is General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida, and then we also read the foreword by Yakubu Gowon, which he titled The Courage to Look Back. It actually takes courage for one to look back. And we went ahead to the prologue by Ibrahim Babangida, GCFR. Then we read part 1, section 1 and 2. So today we are going to part 2, which is early military career of Babangida. That will take us to section 3. A young officer and a gentleman. So before we proceed, let us check and ensure that we are able to share with people that may be willing to join. So, we are now going to share so that others can join in the reading. If at any point in time you are having any difficulty following on with us, please don't hesitate to drop a comment and let us know. I hope and I do believe that today we will not have any issue with the reading. We will be able to read. So this is the book. Thank you for joining. We will start in earnest from where we stopped yesterday. And should in case you missed the previous reading, you can just go through the recordings there on Facebook, on our YouTube channel. And don't forget, our historical work is still ongoing. We are able to have our live today on Storytellers platform, and we see how Enugu was taken over. So please, if you have any difficulty reading or listening to the audio, don't hesitate to call our attention into it. So we will proceed right away with the reading. But before we go on, let us be sure that our sound is good. Yes, I do believe that we have good audio, so we can proceed without much hitches. A young officer and a gentleman. I started my military career at the Nigerian Army Training College, NMTC, on Monday, December 10th, 1962. I had arrived the day before to join other classmates from Bida Provincial Secondary School, Garuba Juba, Sani Sami, Sani Bello, Muhammad Magoro, and Maman Vatsa. In all, 60 of us, drawn from different parts of the country, had reported to design to train on home soil Nigerians that will eventually command and manage a future Nigerian army after independence. The idea at inception was to provide basic military training for infantry officers who would subsequently go abroad for more formal training. NMTC's first cadets entered the college in March 1960. A roll call of that first set of cadets includes names of men who will not only feature prominently in the growth of the Nigerian Army, but also in the country's development. That list includes names like Theophilus Yakubu Danjuma, Samuel Ogbemudia, Julius Alani, Akinrinade Ariyo, Ignatius Obeya, Martin Adamu, and Sule Apollo. NMTC became the Nigerian Defence Academy (NDA) 4 years later. Again, at inception, NMTC and subsequently NDA was patterned after the Joint Defence Service Training Institute of the Indian Armed Forces in Kadakwasla, Pune, India, where cadets of the three services, Army, Navy, and Air Force, trained surprisingly. Many of the earlier trainers at the NDA and its precursor, NDA, was an Indian Army Brigadier, M.R. Verma. Today, the NDA has become a much bigger outfit from its modest beginning in 1960, when we were there in 1960, and instilling discipline and leadership skills in them. Albeit in an academic setting, it is also instructive to note that since 1981, the NDA has begun training foreign militaries. To put things in greater perspective, it might be pertinent at this stage to delve briefly into the history of the Nigerian Army. The Nigerian Army, which prides itself as perhaps the third largest in Africa after the South African and the Egyptian armies, was a product of circumstance. It arose out of the need for the constabulary. After the fall of Lagos to the British on August 6, 1861, under a bogus treaty of cession, the British administrator of Lagos. Later, the constabulary force based in northern Nigeria led to the creation of a Northern Nigeria regiment under the Frederick Lugard's command. In contrast, the merger of the Oil Niger irregulars and the Lagos Constabulary led to the forming of a Southern Nigeria regiment under the command at different times became the 3rd and 4th Battalion of the Nigerian Regiment. By 1930, the Nigerian Regiment was 3,500 men strong, as part of what came to be known as the Royal West African Frontier Force. Its 4 battalions were reorganized into 6, and the colony was divided into Northern and Southern Command. During the formation of the Nigerian Regiment, no Nigerian was commissioned as an officer of the regiment until the late 1940s. By then, of course, World War II had ended. Since the agitation for the independence had begun, the British knew that the eventual formation of a proper Nigerian army was under leadership by the Nigerian Officer Corps. Meanwhile, some Nigerian non-commissioned officers serving in the Nigerian Regiment Technical Department as ordnance engineers and signal officers were sent to the Eaton Hall Officer Cadet School in the United Kingdom for training. When they completed their courses, they were granted short service commissions. Some historians of Nigeria's military history claim that the first Nigerian to be granted a short commission was Lieutenant Louis Victor Ugbona in 1948. But somehow, Ugbona disengaged from the regiment because of his nationalist passions. This development may explain why the honor of the first Nigerian to be commissioned with tag N1 goes to the Lieutenant Wellington Duke Bassey, who was commissioned on April 30th. Zachariah Mallory was commissioned a second lieutenant in 1953. When Queen Elizabeth visited Nigeria between January 25 and February 15, 1956, the Nigerian regiment was renamed the Queen's Own Nigerian Regiment. Later that year, the Queen's Own Nigerian Regiment became the Nigerian Military Force. Even though it remained under the control of the British Army Council, on June 18, the self-governing Nigerian government, then at independence in 1960, the Nigerian Military Force became the Royal Nigerian Army, RNA. And when we became a republic in 1963, the RNA became the Nigerian Army. That change to a republic coincided with the difference in the rank structure and instruments of office peculiar to the British Army. It also witnessed the introduction of the grey khaki uniform of the Nigerian Army. From our first day, NMTC was a challenging experience that none of us seemed prepared for. As part of the tradition of psychologically breaking us in on our first day, Sergeant Major shouted at us, called us names, kicked us, and humiliated us. It was hell. We were all convinced that the push-ups and pull-ups would kill us. Between these physical and endurance tests, which went on for months, and bouts of academic work, preparedness for extended field operations, conducting small unit tactical operations, and small-scale weapon training, a political figure, and tell him we wanted to abandon this. The older Duba didn't waste time with his reply. In a response that I have never forgotten, half pep talk and half threat, he calmly advised us to go back to school, failing which he will ensure that none of us ever got employment anywhere if we dare to abscond from the program. That did the trick. We settled down to work on our return to school and were amazed that the 5-month course went by so quickly. Yet, short as it seemed, I have vivid memories of my 5 months at the college for many reasons. Apart from an opportunity to consolidate my relationship with my classmates from Bida, I made new friends. I met, for instance, a pleasant young man, Paul Taffa, who has remained a close friend and associate ever since. I also met another young man from Kano, Sonny Abacha. Our paths would repeatedly cross until he died in 1998. Two of my instructors at NMCC, Captain Christian C. Ude, and our company commander, Captain Martin Cookshine, made it to India for the second half of my training. I have always remembered both of them. On April 20th, 1963, we passed out of the NMCC, and barely a day after, I and some classmates were on our way to India for the second half of our training. We headed for one of India's oldest military academies, the Indian Military Academy, Dehradun, now in Uttarakhand, founded in 1932. This pride of the Indian military has, since its inception, been the officer training academy for the Indian Army. As I stated earlier, during our independence in 1960, the Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa government decided that it would be more prudent to have the government of India assist Nigeria in army training. That explains, in part, why many of Nigeria's army officers were trained in India. over the sovereign of a widely separated landmass along the Himalayan foothill had just ended. There had been many border skirmishes between India and China after the 1959 Tibetan uprising, when India granted asylum to the Dalai Lama. In 1964, the Academy's initial one-and-a-half-year regular course were truncated and new emergency courses were introduced. And since we had an earlier training period at the NMTC, this arrangement ideally suited our plans. The schedule at the Indian Academy was also hectic and intense, but at least we were now in non-familiar territory. For example, at NMTC, our regular day started before daybreak, followed by 1 hour of drills and physical exercises. Then, after a heavy breakfast, we broke into outdoor and indoor activities, depending on the choice and nature of the training program. These indoor and outdoor activities will be followed by a compulsory regime of extracurricular activities, hobby classes, and indoor activities before we finally collapse into our beds at about 10 p.m. Our routine were sometimes complex and challenging, at other times monotonous, but always adventurous and full of challenges. The Indian Academy's training program included a practical attachment. Accordingly, once the formal training ended in September and I was commissioned as a regular combatant officer of the Royal Nigerian Army, I opted to be attached to the Indian Armour Regiment, known as the 17th Horse Pune Regiment. My choice of the Armour Regiment over others was not accidental, even though I knew then that the Royal Nigerian Army didn't have an armour corps, still fixated on being an engineer, weapon system, and communications equipment. At the time, there was an additional sentimental reason for opting for the armour corps. I fell in love with the uniquely bright French, grey and maroon colors of the Indian Armored Regiment, particularly. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, So let us continue. I returned to Nigeria from India in January 1964 as Second Lieutenant Ibrahim Badamasi with personal army number N438. I was promptly deployed to the Reconnaissance Squadron, the Turaki Squadron, 1st Brigade, Kaduna, although the overall commander of the 1st Brigade was Brigadier with him. I had Major Chris Anufuru, Major Hassan Katsina, and Major Okpu Ison as my immediate commanders. These senior officers were very kind to me in their different ways. However, before I settled down to work at the 1st Brigade, a particular incident led me to add Babangida to my name. During official engagement that led to my deployment to Kaduna officer who confused the Yoruba name Gbadamosi with my last name Badamosi repeatedly asked me whether I was Yoruba. That question had also come up a few years before during my enlisting interview for the military. Since that question persisted, and since I knew I wasn't Yoruba, I decided to take on my father's other name as my last name. And I remember joking about it then and saying, regardless of the name change, I am still my father's son. As happens with new and young entrants into the profession, especially those on overseas courses, I was put on probation for months after returning from India. Somewhere along the line, a final report arrived saying that I was okay and ready for work. During those years, I came under the considerable influence of some officers, including Major John Obienu, a bright, handsome, articulate Sandhurst trained officer. Major Obienu inspired us and instilled so much pride in us in the Armor Corps. We all admired him and wanted to be like him. We even tried to dress like him. I spent 2 memorable years in Kaduna after India. It was also a period I could never forget, with friends like Lieutenant Juba, Lieutenant Chris Ugokwe, Lieutenant Roland Ogbona, Lieutenant Al-Hassan Yakubu, Lieutenant J.C. Ojuku, and Lieutenant Yakubu Anifowose. Together we worked hard, but we also partied a lot, spent long nights out, were consumed by human self-indulgence, and did what every young man did. It was great fun. There are too many stories to tell about those years, as I confine myself to just one. One day, I brought a group of female friends to the apartment Garuba Juba and I shared in the barracks, unmarried housing section, violating the rules. Just as I stepped out to purchase drinks for my guests, the sound from my loud gramophone record player must have filtered out, causing our commander at the time, Major Ato Unegbe, to inquire from my friend, Lieutenant Roland Ogbona, where the female giggles and the noise were coming from. Roland, who knew the culprit was me, lied to the commander, but assured him that the culprit would be fished out. Meanwhile, the commander ordered that the culprit be put under house arrest whenever he was identified. In the interim, Roland, pretending to be looking for the culprit, asked in his broken Hausa, Kai Nekwo, "Are you the one? That is, are you the one guilty of illicitly entertaining female guests and playing loud music?" Until we parted ways many years later, those words, Kai Nekwo, became my pet name for Roland. Fast forward to December 2022, when Roland visited me in Minna after many years of being out of touch. He had come when I was receiving a large delegation from outside the state. Confronted by a sea of faces as he entered the large sitting room, he froze in an impromptu salute before erupting in prolonged laughter and enveloping me in a warm embrace. Then he retorted, "Haba Oga, don't you ever forget things?" It is essential to add that my 2 years in Kaduna between 1964 and early 1966 were interspersed with military duties in quelling both the Tiv riots in 1965 and the disturbances that arose from the failed Western Nigerian region election of late 1965. In both cases, my job was to help quell the disturbances in surveillance, and although those interludes were not full-blown warfare situations, they brought me close to the brutal and futile realities of violence and war skirmishes on a reasonably large scale. During one of those moments, I had the rare privilege of meeting Brigadier Zachariah Mimalari for the first time. For us, young officers, mainly from northern Nigeria, Brigadier Mimalari was a legendary figure. Sometimes, during the Tiv riots, Mimalari has stopped by to see Major Hassan Katsina, who had just taken over from Lieutenant Colonel James Yakubu, saying, "I never forgot." Considered the first regular combatant Nigerian in the officer corps of the Nigerian Army, in contrast to 28 other officers of his time, who rose and were commissioned from the ranks. Mimalari, who was born in today's Yobe State, was one of the earliest Nigerian officers to command the officer cadet training wing of what used to be known as the Boys Company in Zaria. From that position, he inspired and motivated a generation of officers who rose to become very senior officers of the Nigerian Army between 1963 and 1966. He was gruesomely killed during the abortive military coup d'etat of January 1966. Excuse me, please. Thank you. Yes. Sorry for keeping you waiting. Talking of the military coup, the Tar of 1966. We continue from where we stopped. Okay. Talking of the military coup d'etat of 1966 brings me to one of the darkest moments in our national history. In the early hours of January 15, 1966, I was woken up from my sleep at about 5 a.m. with loud continuous bang on my door by my good friend, Lieutenant Christopher Igokwe. I had just gotten home hours before from a late night party and didn't want to be disturbed. But when the banging persisted, I grudgingly got out to confront a bewildered Christopher, all dressed up in field uniform, screaming at me, "Ibrahim, get up! We have to go. Go where at this time?" I queried in reply. Still breathless, Chris continued, almost incoherently, "Didn't you hear that there has been a coup and we have been told to report to the squadron to see our boss?" Our boss was, of course, Major Hassan Usman Katsina. I quickly changed into my uniform as we headed out to the squadron. As we drove past Nasarawa, which housed the minister quarters and the official residence of the Sardauna of Sokoto and Premier of Northern Nigeria, Sir Ahmadu Bello, we noticed that the Sardauna's home was on fire. Chris said he was sure the troops had bombed it. We soon arrived at the squadron headquarters where Major Hassan Katsina was waiting to address us. Very somberly, Major Hassan addressed us in his office and told us what he knew then. He told us that his friend and coursemate of Sandhurst, Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nziogu, had led a coup d'etat, and that Nziogu has confronted him earlier in the day to make up his mind to join the coup or face the consequences of not doing so. Hassan said his agreement to play along with Nziogu saved his life. Major Hassan then instructed us to ensure everybody in the squadron stayed inside. As a young second lieutenant, I was lost for words. I was only 24 and had never known the type of military intervention we were experiencing. I was only vaguely familiar with Gamal Abdel Nasser and his Free Officers movement ousting King Farouk of Egypt in 1952. But that was textbook stuff. To have to experience it firsthand was different. Later that morning, acting presumably as the leader of the Supreme Council of the Revolution of the Nigerian Armed Forces, Major Nziogu addressed all officers in Kaduna at the brigade headquarters. Looking quite ruffled in his bandaged neck and left arm, Nziogu, in a speech in which he referred to us as comrade, informed us that the military had taken over the government of Nigeria and that he had secured northern Nigeria in the name of the Supreme Council of the Revolution. He then appealed for cooperation and understanding from all the officers present. At a subsequent press conference, Nziogu elaborated on what he described as Operation Damisa. Damisa being the Hausa word for the leopard, which never changes its spot. Describing the operation as a necessary service to our country to rid it of all its filth and corruption. Later in the day, the gory details of what had happened, not just in Kaduna but other parts of the country, started to emerge. In Kaduna, the Premier, Sir Ahmadu Bello, his senior wife, Hafsatu, his senior assistant security secretary, Malam Ahmed Ben Musa, Ahmed Patiji, a government driver, and the head of his bodyguard, Zarumi, had all been killed before the break of dawn. There were other killings in Kaduna. The commander of the 1st Brigade of Nigeria Army, Brigadier Samuel Ademulegu, and his pregnant wife, Latifa, whom every senior officer jocularly referred to as Sisinos, were gunned down in their bedroom not far away from their residence. The deputy commandant of the Nigerian Defence Academy, Colonel Raphael Sodende, was also murdered. Outside Kaduna, the story was duplicated in Ibadan and Lagos. In Ibadan, the Deputy Premier Chief Remi Fani-Kayode was arrested and detained. The Premier, Chief Samuel Ladoke Akitola, was not so lucky. The coup plotter killed him after he tried to put up a fight. The Lagos scene was just as horrific. Apart from Prime Minister Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa and Finance Minister Chief Festus Okotie-Eboh, who were kidnapped from their residence and later murdered, much of the leadership of the Nigerian army was wiped out by the plotters. The Adjutant General of the Army, Lieutenant James Yakubu Pam, was the first to be picked up in the presence of his wife, Elizabeth. He never came back alive. Then came the turn of the acting chief of staff at Army headquarters, Colonel Kob Mohammed, who was also assassinated. Lieutenant Colonel Abogo Lagema, then the commander of the 4th Battalion at Ibadan, was not spared either. He was gunned down at his Federal Palace Hotel room in Lagos. But one of the most painful was the killing of Brigadier Zachariah Mimalari. Having only just remarried a month before the January coup, following the tragic death of his wife, Mariamu Mimalari. Mimalari was, at 36, considered one of the finest officers of the Nigerian army. As I stated earlier, he embodied the best of the military discipline: courage, service, respect, integrity, and enduring leadership skills. As the commander of the Southern Brigade, he had all the fighting forces of the battalion under him: the Field Artillery Corps, the Armored and Mechanized Squad. It was said then that Mimalari could mobilize the entire brigade to fight back in the event of a foreign attack. That was how important his position was at the time. The coup plotter knew that he needed to be eliminated for them to succeed. He initially escaped the mutineers when they struck at his 11 Thompson Avenue residence at Ikoyi, Lagos, but when from his hiding place in the shrub around his home, he spotted his chief of staff and brigade major, Major Emmanuel Ifeajuna, driving past. He came out of his hiding, believing he was safe, unknown to him that Major Ifeajuna was one of the plotters. Almost instantly, Mimalari was gunned down by his chief of staff. By Monday, January 17, the situation had stabilized somewhat following the arrest and detention of Major Nziogu and some of the other coup plotters, and it also became clear that Brigadier General Johnson Thomas Umunakwe Agoye-Ironsi had assumed power as head of the federal military government and supreme power as head of and supreme commander of the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. It was a terrible time for the Nigerian military, as I have said elsewhere. As a young officer who saw all of this from a distance, probably ethnic sentiment did not drive the original objective of the coup plotters. For instance, the head of the plotters, Major Kaduna Nzioku, was always Delta State, which in 1966 was in the old Midwestern region. Nzioku spoke fluent Hausa and was as Hausa as any. He and his original team probably thought, even if naively, that they could turn things around for the better in the country. That said, it was heinous callous for Nzioku to have murdered Sir Ahmadu Bello and his wife, Hafsatu, because not only were they eminently adored by many, but also because they were said not to have put up a fight. From that moment, the Posh was infiltrated by outsiders to its supposed original intention, and it took on an unmistakably ethnic coloration, compounded by the fact that there were no related coup activities in the eastern region. It should, however, be borne in mind that some senior officers of Igbo extraction were also victims of the January coup. For instance, my erstwhile commander at the Reconnaissance Squadron in Kaduna, Lieutenant Colonel Ato Chinyelu Unegbe, was brutally gunned down by his own brother, Major Chris Anuforo, in the presence of his pregnant wife, at his 7-Point Road residence in Apapa, for merely being a threat to the revolution. As a disciplined and strict officer, who as the Quartermaster General of the Army was also in charge of ammunition, weapons, equipment, vehicles, and other vital items for the army, the coup plotters feared that he might not cooperate with them. It should also be Lieutenant Fola Oyewole and Olafimihan took part in the failed coup. Another officer of Igbo extraction, Major John Obieno, crushed the Igbo ethnic, referred to the fact that the initial purpose of the plotter was to release Chief Obafemi Awolowo from prison immediately after the coup and make him the executive provisional president of Nigeria. The fact that these Igbo officers would do this to a man not known to be a great lover of the Igbos may have given the coup a different ethnic coloration. But again, I may be wrong here, since this view is speculative. I admit that my position here may be the naive insight of an unsuspecting young officer who viewed events from a distance. My determination to make sense of the bizarre, My determination to make sense of the bizarre unfolding event was short-lived because I left for the United Kingdom barely days after the 1966 coup incident. Long before the coup attempt, I had been penciled down to attend a 4-month young officers course on Saladin Armour Car and Gunnery at the Royal Armour Centre in Bovington, Dorset, United Kingdom. Saladin has 6-wheel 11-ton armor vehicle designed for the British Army in 1954 to replace the obsolete AEC armor car used during World War II. Despite its age, The three crude armor vehicles armed with a 76mm low-pressure rifle remain in service, albeit in secondary roles, until the early 1980s. They were used during the Nigerian Civil War. The course in Dorset was fine and was over by April 22, 1966. The actual course of study included details of the maintenance and driving and extensive workshop on signal and radio communications. But in those 4 months, my mind was glued to events at home. When I returned to my reconnaissance unit in Kaduna, I saw and felt the tension in the air. The tension in the barrack was so palpable that you could touch it. It was clear that northern officers were spoiling for a fight to retaliate against the killings of January 15. The tension was compounded by the fact that there was a well-organized campaign to brand us. The so-called northern officers as cowards for failing to avenge the killing of the Prime Minister, the Sardauna and other northern officers who lost their lives. I recall a particular incident that I shall never forget. Some of us young officers had gone out one evening for drinks at a nightclub near the Ahmadu Bello Stadium. As we settled down to our drinks, we were confronted by passers-by who recognized us. They rained abuses on us, calling us big fools and cowards for not doing what they thought we should do. Articles in newspaper pages were replete with scorn for us northern officers. Stories made the round that even the wives of married officers fought their husbands, calling them cowards and threatening to withhold conjugal accord to officers of northern extraction. Meanwhile, the rumor mills went into overdrive with conspiracy theories. There were rumors that officers of Igbo extraction were planning a second coup to kill more northern officers. Unfortunately, in the absence of an official federal government announcement about the fate of the soldiers killed during the January coup, rumors were rife as to whether they were dead or alive. For instance, there was the story of a riot that broke out at the 2nd Brigade headquarters in Lagos when an attempt was made to remove Brigadier Mimalari's nameplate because many low-ranking officers believed that Mimalari was so invulnerable that he should not have died, and that since he was still alive, an attempt to remove his nameplate was a continuation of the plot against northern officers. There was also a rumor plan to swap the 1st and 4th Battalion and rotate the military governors of the different regions. These rumors were amplified by these confirmed rumors that an Igbo domination of national affairs, gloating over the January killings, contrary to a promise given after the coup, was quashed, that the coup plotters would be tried. None was ever brought to trial. Although some were detained, on the contrary, a few of the coup plotters were promoted. This confirmed rumor that an Igbo domination of national affairs was in the works. Meanwhile, the role of disgruntled northern civilian propagandists and politicians picked up more steam. They deployed a combination of incitement and swirling rumors as psychological warfare to get northern soldiers to retaliate for the killing of January 15. Many civilian leaders kept hammering that we were cowards for not avenging the death of our leaders. This view is supported by General Gowon, recollection of the army official history of those years. General Gowon said, the northern politicians infiltrated the northern soldiers and officers, trying to convince them that there was a need for them to retaliate. Unfortunately, some of the decisions of the Central Command in Lagos fell into the fear of those who suspected imminent sectional domination. For instance, in late May, the General Aguiyi-Ironsi-led federal government was convinced that the best way to unify the country was to issue the Unification Decree No. 34 of 1966, abolishing and replacing the regions with a group of 35 provinces. That decree also unified the civil service. Decree 34 was a significant disadvantage to northern Nigeria, considering its inadequacy in human resources. This further fueled the fear of a southern domination of northern Nigeria and subsequently the entire country. Whether these fears of power domination were unfounded or not, it was clear that something was about to give from the sequence of cascading events. Unfortunately, the near collapse of the age-long tradition of military discipline, many young officers, particularly non-commissioned NCOs of northern Nigeria extraction, became unmanageable. Many of them refused outright to take order from their superior, and in army where most of the infantry were northerners, that constituted a real problem. Suddenly, there was a rush of mutinies in different army formations in the country. There was, for instance, the case of the 4th Battalion in Ibadan, where northern officers refused to take order from Major M.O. Nzefili, who, as the second in command at the battalion, replaced Lieutenant Colonel Abogo Lagema, who was murdered in Lagos during the January coup attempt, and even after another northern chief officer, Major Joe Akahan, replaced Nzefili, the northern officer remained restive. Similar scenarios played out in other parts of the country, and by now, rumors of an imminent upheaval were so widespread, you knew it was a question of time before we had a disastrous national crisis. On July 28, 1966, things came to head, and what has come to be known as the counter-coup of 1966 in Nigerian military history began. The commanding officer of the Abeokuta garrison, Lieutenant Colonel Gabriel Okoweze, called a meeting of the rank and file of the garrison to douse the rumor of another coup. Unfortunately, agitated and aggrieved junior northern officers who erroneously believed that the meeting was convened to complete the terrible killings begun during the January coup by Igbo officers, burst into the forum, instantly killing Lieutenant Colonel Okoweze and the commander of the Rex Squadron, Major John Obienu. Lieutenant A.L. Oro, who drove in from town and stumbled on the situation, was also gunned down. Obvious of the going on, Orok, by the way, was Efik, not Igbo. Later that night, other officers of Igbo extraction in and around the garrison were identified and killed after a door-to-door search. The killings quickly spread to Ibadan and Lagos. Captain Okoye, who was in transit at the Ikeja airport in Lagos, was arrested and killed. In Ibadan, hostile troops surrounded the State House at Agodi, where General Iransi, the state military governor, Lieutenant Colonel Francis Adekunle Fajuyi, and the 2nd Brigade Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hilary Njoku, were located. The hostile troop abducted Iransi, Fajuyi, and Iransi Air Force ADC Captain Andrew Nwako. Iransi and Fajuyi were later killed. However, Nwako managed to escape. The killings continue in Kaduna. The first victim was the commander of the Kaduna-based 3rd Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Israel Okoro. His death in Kaduna was followed by that of the commander of the 2nd Rex Squadron, Major Isong in Kano. In Kano, where the 5th Battalion was under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Mohammed Shua. The situation seemed initially under control until the troops mutinied, leading to the death of many Igbo civilians in Kano. Apparently, what started as an attack on Igbo officers became an attack on Igbo civilians and officers alike. Unfortunately, the violence got out of control and spread to parts of Bauchi, Sokoto, Katsina, and Zaria. Hundreds of Igbos died between Sunday, May 29 and Sunday, June 5, 1966. The collapse of discipline within the military was so devastating that even northern officers had to be protected from rampaging northern NCOs. For instance, Lieutenant Colonel Joe Akahan, unruly junior officer, shot him out of his barracks. There was the story, for example, of the Army Provost Marshal, Major Ekane, who was shot dead for no reason by Sergeant Lapdam on Kata Bridge in Lagos, while on an errand for Lieutenant Colonel Gowon. In August 1966, a detachment of the 4th Battalion in Ibadan, consisting of NCOs and junior officers, raided the old Benin prison to release northern soldiers who had been held there since the January coup attempt. While inside the prison premises, they murdered 5 Igbo officers who were also detained in the same prison for their role in the January coup, including Majors Chris Anuforo and Donatus Okafor. The chaotic period of indiscipline was widespread enough for unruly and devious officers to attempt to use the occasion to settle old scores with their superiors. This situation almost cost the life of a fine officer like Samuel Ogbemudia. Before the counter-coup, Major Ogbemudia had detained Lieutenant Bukasua Dimka, yes, my same old friends Buka Dimka, for violating an order forbidding unauthorized troop movement. But after Dimka protested that he was the unfair victim of ethnic profiling, Ogbemudia released him from detention. Angered by his provocation, Dimka hatched a plot to kill Brigade Major Ogbemudia. Fortunately, Ogbemudia was tipped off by Colonel Hassan Katsina and Major Abba Kazar, who then provided Ogbemudia with an escape Land Rover complete with a submachine gun. Meanwhile, Dimka, who got wind of this, marshaled a group of northern soldiers who then pursued Ogbemudia from Kaduna to Owo in Ondo State, sometimes shooting at him. At Owo, Ogbemudia abandoned his Land Rover when he ran out of fuel and was said to have scaled a 6-foot fence into a thick forest to escape Dimka's soldiers. It must have been an awful experience for a man like Ogbemudia, who would, after that scary experience, have an exemplary career in the Nigerian army. In Enugu, as was the case during the January coup attempt, the situation was calmer, thanks to the prompt intervention of the commander of the 1st Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel David Ogunewe. Once he got acknowledged of the killings in other parts of the country, he quickly locked up the battalion's armory and placed it under the joint guard of northern and southern officers. Those were truly terrible times. The killings, which started on May 29, peaked on September 29, 1966. According to official army record, no less than 213 predominantly Igbo officers and other rank were killed. The period was undoubtedly a dark phase in our history as a nation. The first coup attempt, which led to the counter-coup, should never have occurred. The young idealistic officer bit off more than they could chew. Without question, both events, the first more than they could, both events, the first coup and the counter coup, deepened the dust, the distrust among ethnic groups in the country, distrust that continued to plague us to this day. But even more fundamentally, those coups led to one of the bloodiest fratricidal conflicts in modern Africa, the 30-month Nigerian Civil War, with devastating consequences that we have never fully recovered from as a country. My participation in the Nigerian Civil War as a combatant left deep scars on me, both literally and metaphorically. It redefined for me the very essence of human existence, but even more fundamentally, it drove home the simple fact of the futility of war, whether on a national scale or a continental scale, and that the consequences of war, including the physical and psychological effects, take time to heal, if they ever do. Yes, I have some pictures here in the book. The first one is a picture of a little girl and an elderly man. The caption reads, "My father with my sister, Hanatu." As a young, then I see the picture of a boy, as a young 12-year-old boy, that is Babangida himself. My sister, Hajia Anatu Gambo. Then I see the badge of Bida Old Students Association, BOSA. Then the entrance of Government College, Bida, with my friends at Bida, Abdusalami Abubakar, first left, Ismaila Ahmed, second left, Muhammad Magoro, second right, and Buba Ahmed, far right. Then as a young man in Kaduna, 1969, that is another picture, with my young wife, Miriam, 1969, with my good friend, Abdusalami, a second lieutenant and a gentleman. During the Civil War, yes, I saw the picture. It's a white man, and I think someone that also looked like Ojukwu. At our wedding in Kaduna, September 6, 1969, with baby Halima, with General JTU Ironsi and other officers. My swearing-in ceremony as member of the Supreme Military Council, 1976. Lieutenant Wellington Duke Bassi, Lieutenant JTU Agoye Ironsi, Lieutenant S.A. Ademulego, Lieutenant R.A. Shodede, Zakaria Mimalari, the first Nigerian to be commissioned as an officer in the Nigerian Regiment in 1948, Lieutenant I.V. Ugbona. Then there is a group picture the first generation of army officer as at June 1959. Then at the National Day celebration with President Shehu Shagari, 1979. As Chief of Army Staff with General Buhari. So that brings us to the end of Section 3 in Part 2. Then the next reading is going to be Section 4, the Nigerian Civil War and the NDA teaching years. Nigerian Civil War and the NDA teaching years. So, probably tomorrow, or if you have time later, we can still read that part. But for now, we will have a break. Thank you very much. Or you can just stream it online and listen to it again. Thank you for always being there, and we will be happy to have you some other time.